Imagine waking up, expecting to go about your day as usual, only to find a throng of strangers and reporters crowding your house outside. Your name, Satoshi Nakamoto, is plastered on newspapers and magazines as you wake up to news that you are the inventor of Bitcoin. But you didn't invent Bitcoin. You don't even know what Bitcoin is. This is the story of Dorian Nakamoto, an ordinary man caught in the biggest mystery in crypto, and how one overeager journalist with little care for journalistic ethics and the consequences of her actions would upend his life forever. All in the name of getting her story published. But how did this all happen? If you're an older gent like me, you might remember a time when Bitcoin had no face. But then came Dorian Prentice Satoshi Nakamoto. He was born in the quiet city of Beppu in Japan in 1949, a place historically known as a refuge for wounded samurai. Dorian moved to California as a kid. He was a lifelong tinkerer, engineer, a physicist, and a model train nerd. He was also a real stickler for privacy. He was someone who didn't like attention. He definitely wasn't the sort of recluse anyone expected to become the face of Bitcoin. Dorian worked as a systems engineer for defense contractors. He even worked for Citibank at one point. So a lot of the work he did was hush. According to his brother, Arthur, Dorian was brilliant, very focused, a little eccentric. Mathematics, engineering, computers, you name it, he can do it. But as I mentioned, Dorian was also intensely private and wary. He didn't have the internet at home for years. He also refused to own a smartphone, and he only used flip phones. He said, "I'm a very private person. I do not like people prying into my life. I want to be left alone." Professionally, he was fired twice in the 90s. He fell behind on his mortgage payments at one point as well, which would end up with the banks foreclosing on his home. By the early 2010s, he was mostly working odd jobs. He was a substitute teacher at one point. He was also a poll taker and a day laborer. But there's been one constant in his life very few people know about, and that's his love for model trains. And he wasn't just a dabbler, he was obsessed. In fact, before he'd become the face of Bitcoin, he had already been featured in Model Railroader magazine, a publication for model train enthusiasts and hobbyists. "I like model trains. I fix things for fun." That's all he wanted, to be left alone with his trains. And that's exactly how Leah Goodman ended up contacting Dorian. She emailed him asking about model trains. They started corresponding back and forth, and she started prying into other aspects of his life. And that's when he dropped all contact. Then she did him dirty like Phil Leotardo did Bobby Bacala. And if you get that reference, we should be friends. Fast forward to March 2014. Turns out Goodman worked for Newsweek, a publication with questionable journalistic ethics, one that's hungry for clicks. So Goodman went over to Dorian's house and decided, you know what? I'm gonna ambush him. At this point, Dorian's confused, he barely understands what's going on, and she presses him about Bitcoin, and he tells her, "I am no longer involved in that." But here's the thing. He wasn't talking about Bitcoin. Dorian actually thought she was asking him about his past classified work with defense contractors and Citibank, stuff that he literally couldn't talk about because he was under NDA. In fact, when reporters pressed him with the Bitcoin logo, he would famously respond, "What's Bitcoin?" Well, Goodman ran with the story anyway. Newsweek publishes his name, photo, car, address, the whole 9 yards. Thanks to Goodman's efforts, Dorian's life quickly turns into a circus show. Reporters are camped outside his house. Cameras are pointing through his windows. He's chased through the streets. This guy can't catch a break. He ends up calling the police twice. In a Reddit AMA, Dorian says, "Leah stalked me to come out and stayed roughly 45 minutes at my doorsteps. She had disappeared, then reappeared with her car while I was talking to the two officers. I told them I did not want to talk to the reporter, but the sheriff advised me to talk to her or she wouldn't go away. I was not like a celebrity who would be badgered like this daily, and I gave in." And we're not talking about a mild inconvenience. Dorian was a man in his 60s who had just survived prostate cancer and a stroke only a couple months before this.
The main reason I'm here is to clear my name, that I have nothing to do with Bitcoin, nothing to do with developing. I was just an engineer doing something else. If you look at the time span, 2001, when it was supposed to be developed, I wasn't there. I was working for the government through contracting company.
He had no internet, he barely had a penny to his name, and he was suddenly caught in the middle of a global scandal. His public statement, issued in March 2014, reads, "I did not create, invent, or otherwise work on Bitcoin. I unconditionally deny the Newsweek report. My background is in engineering. I also have the ability to program. My most recent job was as an electrical engineer troubleshooting air traffic control equipment for the FAA. I have no knowledge of, nor have I ever worked on, cryptography, peer-to-peer systems, or alternative currencies. Newsweek's false report has been the source of a great deal of confusion and stress for myself, my 93-year-old mother, my siblings, and their families. I ask that you now respect our privacy." Did I forget to mention that he lived with his 93-year-old mother? In 2014, Dorian did a legendary Reddit AMA with the Bitcoin community. For context, he had been donated a sizable sum in Bitcoin as the community rallied behind him following the Newsweek debacle. Some highlights. On whether he knew Hal Finney. No. I do wish I had known him. We would have had fun together. When someone asked him why he didn't just pretend to be Bitcoin's creator, that would be disgrace to my birthplace of Kyushu Samurai. On the meaning of his name, yes, it means inside the origin or inside a book in kanji, Chinese characters, Nakamoto Satoshi. Red Moon, Dawn, or Satoru, meaning to be awakened as Buddha. This was a name given to me by my great-grandfather, who was a Zen priest in Japan. What a legend. Anyway, the backlash to Newsweek's story was immediate and well-deserved. Media critics tore the piece apart. iMedia Ethics questioned whether Goodman used unethical undercover tactics. They called out Newsweek for violating his privacy, misrepresenting quotes, and failing to get informed consent. They also accused Goodman of twisting Dorian's conditional statements out of context about his past work in a shameless manner, by the way, to basically manipulate their version of the story, which also does a disservice to their readers when I think about it, because it's like, damn, you're really trying to convince your readers of this false narrative that you guys concocted, which is insane. Publishing his address, car, and photos of him, which put them at risk, all for the sake of a headline. Newsweek didn't just ruin a man's life for clicks. They doxed an elderly engineer and his 93-year-old mother, and they never even apologized. In fact, Newsweek never retracted the story, and when challenged, they actually doubled down, stating that they had a journalistic duty to pursue the story and that they stood behind Leah Goodman. The good news is that this entire trashy scandal of Newsweek and Leah Goodman ended up in a case study in media malpractice. Don't publish without evidence, don't destroy private lives for clicks, and don't dox innocent people just to fit your damn narrative. While the mainstream media swarmed, the Bitcoin community did the opposite. That little fundraiser I mentioned earlier, it was led by a Bitcoin figure named Andreas Antonopoulos, and they raised over 67 Bitcoin for Dorian and his family. And that is how Dorian Nakamoto became a symbol of everything weird and wonderful about Bitcoin's early days. He's still used in a lot of Bitcoin art, and he's become a staple of Bitcoin culture to this day. But here are the facts. Dorian was never Satoshi. Dorian did not invent Bitcoin. He never wrote a line of Bitcoin code. At the end of the day, he was just an elderly engineer who wanted to be left alone with his model trains. So here's something he said that's been on my mind. I have not been able to find steady work as an engineer or programmer for 10 years. I'm trying to recover. My prospects for gainful employment have been harmed because of Newsweek's article. Shame on you, Leah Goodman. Shame on you, Newsweek. And bless your heart, Dorian. You're a legend. All right, that covers our episode for today. If you're into art, ordinals, tech, and Bitcoin like me, give us a like and subscribe to the channel. In the meantime, check out the episode on Hal Finney or any of the other crazy crypto scandals I've covered. I'm your host, Valerio Yoshi, and you've been watching DGen Reports. Ciao.